Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where in the country you are, or depending on which country you're in. My name is Gregory Skinner. I'm the VP of Strategic Insights at a company called Escalent, and today we're going to talk about electric vehicles in the commercial space and the challenges and questions that companies who are adopting electric vehicles that they face on a daily basis, and get down to some real sort of tangible on the ground insights that we see when we go and we start to explore this marketplace. So just to give you a quick rundown of what we're going to talk about today, we're gonna level set. So we're going to begin with state of the nation when it comes to commercial EVs. You know, some of the most significant hurdles that we see these companies facing as they transition into adopting EVs and even going through the consideration process. And then we'll talk a little bit about the future of commercial EVs as we see it today, and then get into a little bit of a quick Q&A at the end. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Gregory Skinner. I work for a company called Escalent. I am the VP of Strategic Insights, specialize in commercial vehicles. And apparently I'm a fleet expert because that's what it says on the screen. I have over two decades of expertise in the automotive space. I've spent a lot of time working with different OEs, communication companies, advanced product companies, helping them understand what's going on in that space, helping them navigate it, and most importantly, understanding the voice of the customer. And you'll see today that that's probably the most important thing, is really understanding who this customer is and what it is that they want. Now, my focus, especially in the fleet and commercial space, is really about extracting these on the ground, sort of true, real, live marketplace insights. It's easy, well, relatively easy, I should say relatively easy, to get that sort of 20 or 30,000 foot view, you know, to really sort of plot out long-term what's going to happen. But it's not until you really start to speak to these fleet managers and these owners that you really understand the challenges that they're going through and the sorts of objectives that they want to achieve. So I take all that information, you know, basically it's working with our clients to reveal these sort of strategic business pathways. So whether they're on the customer side or the supplier side, and really pulling back the curtain to help, you know, again, whoever it is, understand the needs of the customer and what it is that they need to deliver. So my specialty is white space development, new product development, customer engagement, and of course, electric vehicles. You know, we were just at the ACT Expo, the Advanced Clean Tech Expo, and I tell you, you know, everything that's going on today in this market is about electric. You know, I swear I went to the bathroom and this is what I saw. And it's true. I just sat down and I recharged for 5 minutes. I'm not kidding. Probably 50 or 60, maybe even 70% of all of the exhibitors there were talking about fuel cell. They were talking about BEV. They're talking about infrastructure. You name it, it was electric. And that's very cool. I mean, that's awesome. You know, I stopped by the Allison booth, powertrain company, and they have an axle there. I could not get over this. They have an axle with 2 electric motors in it that puts out 47,000 Newton meters of torque. So for anybody who's an engineering geek or a nerd or likes, you know, statistics like that, 47,000 Newton meters of torque. I was looking at a video today and a passenger car puts out 400, just so you get a sense, 400 versus 47,000. And this is from 2 electric motors. So this is no joke. I mean, people are going at this full steam ahead and really trying to advance that marketplace. Certainly the things that we see resonating today, or the most amount of chatter, is around infrastructure and range, battery technology. But it's not until you start to drill down that you really understand the things that are happening behind the scenes that are going to influence everybody, whether you're a supplier, you know, a user, a tech company, you name it. There's stuff happening you need to be aware of. So let's take a quick look at what's going on in the marketplace. At Escalent, we have a product called Fleet Advisory Hub. It's one of the many products that we offer. This one is excellent because basically it's the ongoing gathering of insights and information from thousands of commercial and fleet decision makers. So basically we're I don't want to say polling them, but certainly we're in communication with them to understand their wants or needs and how they're thinking. So I took a little snippet from that product, and here's what we see. Despite relatively low penetration, and the caveat here is that things are constantly changing. So these numbers are changing almost on a daily basis. But despite the low penetration that's happening in the broader marketplace, EV familiarity with commercial fleet, people in commercial fleet is at almost 90%, which is incredible. Like if you think back a few years, there's no way that many people were really thinking about or experiencing electric vehicles. 51% say at some point in the future, EVs or electric vehicles will replace gasoline. 42% are saying that's a pretty interesting idea. When you look at general fleet shopping, the shopping activity, 64% say, hey, it's going to happen at the dealer. 17% say through a fleet management company, and 21% through the manufacturer. Now, I just want to say another caveat. The sample that we have here is among sort of the more advanced or progressive thinking fleets out there. But even at that, we're talking about 17% are currently either integrating or pilot testing electric vehicles in their fleet. So that's a big deal. This marketplace is moving pretty rapidly and pretty dramatically. And over the years, I've seen it pick up from 0 to 100, seemingly overnight. So let's talk about the future of commercial EVs. Oh wait, that's for the group after you guys. So let's talk about the future of commercial EVs. It's bright, it's rosy. You see the guy there in the truck, he's seemingly reading Facebook, a newspaper, or something. The truck's driving itself. The future is pretty bright, I have to say. When you think about what this future promises, it's basically saying there's going to be less dependency on fossil fuels. Not having to fuel up is a big one that we hear all the time. So if you ask an owner or an operator, they say, hey, my cost of fuel is enormous. And so to be able to not have to fuel up constantly is going to save us a ton of cash. There's cost controls. There's, of course, the service and maintenance benefit. So what we hear is all it's going to be is electricity and tires. That's all I got to pay for. Versus now, it's constantly maintaining things, fixing things, costs a lot of money. So this future is pretty bright. I have to say, there's another component to this too, which is, of course, the environmental piece. And that's part of the sell. So again, at that Clean Tech Expo, people are talking about no noise pollution, zero emissions, a clean environment. And this, believe it or not, is sometimes driven by people's kids. The kids come home from school and they say, why aren't we driving an electric car? Or do you have electric vehicles at work? And managers actually think about that. People think about that and they say, okay, you know what? It's time for us to seriously consider this because I want to do something good for my kids in the future. So that is an actual key motivator. So very interesting stuff. The most important thing, though, is that people say, you know what? The future is electric. And we want to be there. We do not want to be left behind. We do not want to be that person with the flip phone or the person with big fonts on their phone trying to read it because they're so out of date that they can't keep up. They're saying we need to be where the future is taking us. And that is also a big motivator. So whether or not you believe, the trend in EV is supply driven, demand driven, regulation driven, everybody is jumping on board, and they're jumping on board in a big way. We haven't seen this much consensus or consensual thinking since Woodstock in '69, or for the younger people out there, Lollapalooza in '91. So let's talk a little bit about the realities, because again, everybody's talking infrastructure, everybody's talking range. That's almost table stakes, to be honest, from where we're sitting and from the information that we gather, especially, again, sort of on the ground. range and infrastructure are commonalities. It's the sort of thing that you would expect anybody who's considering an electric vehicle to talk about. But that stuff is just really tip of the iceberg stuff. Um, you know, it's not until we really start to talk to these owners that we see the challenges and the questions that they have before they go out and they spend that dollar, that hard money, that hard cash. So today, we're going to spend some time and I'm going to take you through the top 5 biggest questions and considerations around commercial electric vehicles. There's something in here for everybody. So whether you're a manufacturer, an OE, whether you're a fleet manager, whether you're on the tech side, you'll find something within these top 5 that should be provocative to you. My goal as the person in charge of insights and strategy is to be provocative, to get you thinking differently, to get you thinking about the future. Because you need to anticipate, you really need to be 2 steps ahead of this market to be able to keep up with it. One of the first presentations that we saw was the amount of adoption that we anticipate by 2030. And it's pretty dramatic, considering in the passenger vehicle segment, we're talking single digit adoption, but in commercial, this segment is far more amenable to new technologies and cost savings that fleet adoption is going to be pretty rampant. So let me take you through the top 5. The very first one that we're going to start out with is this idea that, guess what? It's kind of about maintenance costs. So electric vehicles are kind of about maintenance costs and they're kind of about fuel economy, but really it's about your neighbor's daughter's husband. I know what you're thinking. What are you talking about? Well, let me explain. So when we look at the drivers to consideration and adoption, they vary pretty widely. They go from the smallest, most seemingly inane thing to the most significant thing. But one thing that really stands out when we start digging into the data and going and speaking to people is that size of the fleet is a big variable. It's a variable upon which you can say it's going to affect the way that people think about EV adoption. So, there's a polarity that's happening. Whether you're talking small fleets or big fleets, there's a big difference. So let's just say big fleets is, I'm making this up, 50 to 100 or more. So we know, yes, there are lots of fleets out there like the Amazons and the FedExes and the UPSs of the world who have thousands, tens of thousands of vehicles. But for the most part, we know that in this marketplace, a big fleet is around 100 or more. So let's say that. So when you talk to someone who's in that realm, 150 to 100 vehicles, and you ask them, why are you jumping in at this point? The answer is typically, it comes down to dollars and cents. It's the bean counters. Basically, they're saying, we're going to take an electric vehicle and we're going to take a diesel or our current gas vehicle and we're going to line them up. We're going to look at all of our typical KPIs like TCO, ROI, miles driven, costs that are associated with running the vehicle. We're going to see how it nets out. Hopefully, at the end of the day, once we parse it all out, the electric vehicle will win. But right now, it's a test, and that's what we're getting into because every penny counts. That's great. What you'll see is that they will adopt basically in onesies and twosies in the near term. They don't want to commit too much. They don't want to put too much money into it, but they do want to see if it makes a viable or reasonable business case, and that makes perfect sense. At the other end of the spectrum is where it gets interesting. Because now when you talk about small fleet owners, so the guy or gal who has maybe five pieces of equipment or 10 pieces of equipment, you know what? They act like regular consumers. They act like they're buying a passenger vehicle. So this is where we get to that picture on the screen. I go out and I'm speaking to these fleet owners about consideration of EVs, why they want it, why they have it. And one guy I talked to says, you know what? I got one. Great, explain why. Because my neighbor just bought a Tesla and we went for a rip in it, and that thing is awesome. And I thought, we should get one of these for the fleet. I'm not kidding you. That's the due diligence that went through that he went through in his purchase decision. So, don't be fooled thinking that everybody's getting into EVs, onto the EV bandwagon for the same reason. It could be everything from, we're saving hundreds of dollars a month on something to, hey, that's a cool looking EV. Let me go check it out. This is important because you really have to take a really good look at your specific target market. We know that within fleet, it's a bunch of snowflakes. Nobody is the same. So hoping that everybody's getting into or motivated into EVs for the same reason, like range or infrastructure and utility, is a little bit misleading. It's really essential to dig down into your target market and understand what's driving them to consider an EV in the first place. Number two, and this comes from the last one. We're basically talking 2, 3, 4 KPIs, things that matter. So we're talking TCO, ROI, ELDs, DOT, TSPs, FMCs. I know the acronyms, they just keep flowing. There's so many of them. But all of these things are drivers. All of these things are things that make people consider whether or not to get into EVs. And there'll be a quiz at the end to see if everybody can name off what all of those different acronyms and consolidated or condensed words mean. So the two primary measures that people typically talk about when it comes to EVs, acquisition and spend, are TCO and ROI. So how much does it cost to service the vehicle, cost of parts, labor, depreciation, acquisition. The interesting thing is that with the onset or the coming of EVs, the amount of detailed information that's going to be accessible is going to be exponential. Basically we're talking about sophisticated data gathering, analytics, telematics. Companies are going to be able to squeeze out all sorts of information out of their vehicles that they never had access to before. Things like coaching, preventative maintenance, efficient motor use, how people are driving. It's just going to go on and on and on. And that is fantastic. That's amazing because the cost savings and the benefits are going to be huge. But did you know that when it comes to fleets, a good number, and I would hazard to say the vast majority of people, do not use TCO as the metric? We throw it about in the industry as, TCO is the big driver. That's what people, are focused on. But really, it's sort of a catch-all for all sorts of different things. Typically, when you come to the smaller fleets, they're still using manual tools. They're using logbooks, they're using Excel, they're using their phones, scraps of paper. They're not sitting there calculating TCO on a daily basis. And in fact, when they do it, typically it's around PMs. It's about preventative maintenance. So I'm capturing this data so that I know when I need to change the oil on our vehicles in our fleet, because if they break down, then we're out of luck. The guys aren't working and it's going to cost us more money than if I take the time to capture this data now. It's not about that. It's about managing your costs, making sure that you're not spending too much money or that the fleet isn't down. I remember us talking to an owner, he was a fleet manager. He had 100 pieces of equipment. He's a great guy. He's honestly incredible to talk to. And we ask him, we say, how is it that you manage your costs? And he said, I've got a binder and it's full of all the things we spend money on. And I am known for having a great memory. I can tell you how many fuses we bought when we bought our last oil filter, our last oil change. And honestly, there was a sense of pride there, which is great because he's a great asset. But he's not sitting there running these TCO calculations like we believe. So, the promise of EVs and the way that we sort of sell it to the marketplace, like this notion of cost reduction and cost management, is a bit of an enigma right now, Because it's not until the different fleets start to get up to speed on data management, and data review, that this is even going to matter. And to be honest, they might not even care. Again, this is sort of getting down to brass tacks. Like, what does that fleet manager or that operator owner really care about? And they might not care about those sorts of numbers. And so the takeaway here is we may need to come up with a different set of metrics when it comes to EVs to really get people engaged and interested in what an EV has to offer. Our next one, the information void is vast. It's a chasm full of unknowns, as well as creating huge hurdles to adoption. It's literally making people crazy. So, it's nobody's fault, but there's a ton of information out there. There's probably too much information out there. There's companies jumping on board. We talk about the last 100 feet, we talk about the last mile. Everybody wants to get involved in this, and everybody's throwing information out there. The problem is there's a distinct lack of insight from the owner perspective for them to be able to make effective decisions. There's basically not enough info that they can make a hard choice on. So the net result is risk mitigation in the biggest way possible. Let me give you an example. We'll go and we'll talk to a fleet manager and we will say, okay, tell me about your business. And say, okay, I've got 20 trucks. My guys and gals, they go out, they're making deliveries. The geographical area is probably about 30, 40 miles. So on a daily basis, I say, how long do you go? And they go, we're probably traveling about 100 miles, 80 to 100 miles. I go, great. I go, imagine I'm giving you an electric vehicle. I will pay for it. How many miles of range do you need? And they will say, I need 600. What happened? I go, even on a bad day, or on a good day, you're only doing 150 miles. Why would you need 600? And the explanation is, I don't want my people to get stranded. I don't want to charge all the time. I only want to charge every few days. I don't want any downtime. What happens if they're out making a delivery and they can't do it on time? Then our business reputation is at stake. Where do I find chargers? And on and on and on. It's essential that, especially from an OE perspective, that we go beyond things like range. It's probably even going to have to go beyond the vehicle itself when we talk about unique selling propositions to get someone interested, because they're hedging and they don't want to get caught out. I'll give you another example. So, a fleet owner, we give them a hypothetical and we say, okay, you have 50 vehicles. We're going to make 20 of them full electric. What's going to happen? Tell me about this scenario. And they say, well, we're going to put in 20 charging stations. I'll teach my guys how to drive them and we're good. Off we go. But little does he know that, or she know, guess what? It might take 3 months to 2 years to get your infrastructure built. You might have to put in a substation. The electrical capacity to your area might not be sufficient. You might not have enough space. Are you going to drive them in or out? Where are the charging units located? Where do you park them? Are they in the field or that? There's so many considerations that they need more, not more data, but better information to be able to make effective decisions. And there's literally a mountain of information for them to climb before they're willing to pull the trigger. Next one is the technician shortage. So as we all know, there's a technician shortage right now. There's new tech coming. Electric vehicles are a whole new thing. And but the thing is, there's a burning desire for fleets to do everything in-house. They really, if they could, they don't want to send anything out. So they're in a bit of a pickle. So what's happening now? So qualified techs are in high demand. It's hard to keep them. So if we go and we talk to, let's say, a school board or a transportation company like a bus company, they'll say, we have trouble keeping techs because all these startups show up and they basically poach our people. It's hard to keep someone when these guys are offering high pay. We also have another factor, which is, okay, electric vehicles are not mechanical. Yeah, they're partially mechanical, but not like a Cummins. So now we're talking the need for software engineers. When we were at ACT Expo, so the Clean Tech Expo, I talked to a guy and I said, hey, you know what? Tell me a little bit about yourself. And he was an Ivy League educated software engineer. And he was leading, the electric vehicle charge for that company. It's fascinating. So I'm like, so is this the future? Is this what we're looking at? And he's like, yeah, we need software guys. Certainly we need guys on the ground to actually do stuff. But if something breaks down, we might be doing analysis on the computer. Marry that or juxtapose that with this notion for wanting to do everything in-house, and it gets really tough. So now what's a company supposed to do? Do you stay in it as long as you want, like, dance with the devil, as long as possible? Or do you take a leap of faith and go electric? It's a really tough choice for a fleet manager to make because they want to get in it, but there's a lot of barriers there. By the way, there's an opportunity or a potential opportunity there for service and maintenance, right? But the challenge is you really have to do service and maintenance right, because when a fleet owner sends something out for service and it's not in-house, then they don't control anything anymore, and they want to be in control of their fleet at all times. This last one, this is my favorite. Oftentimes around fleet management software companies, this is the sort of thing we hear them talking about. We have an amazing product. It's scalable, it's modular, it's efficient, it's cost effective, it's fast. Nobody's buying it. What do you mean nobody's buying it? There's a difference between a corporate point of view and corporate strategy on a deliverable or a product or service than there is from a fleet manager perspective. So from a corporate perspective or a provider perspective, the idea here, the key driver is that change is great. We love change. Technology is helping us do things better, faster, more efficiently. It's more cost effective. There's no reason why anybody wouldn't want change. It's why we change our phones every 6 months, because we love new things. From a fleet manager perspective, change is probably up there as one of the most horrible things you would ever want to embrace. Why? And this is, it's sort of a global statement, but why? And the thinking is, if we come in with a big change, we've got so much work to do. First of all, we've got to sell it up the chain. So to the accountant, to the owner, whoever that might be, we've got to convince them to spend the money. And then I got to sell it down the chain. So to the guys in the field, again, guys and gals in the field, to my crews, maybe it's a technology change, and maybe they don't want to be fussed with technology. Maybe they don't even know how to use it. So now I have to convince them to use it and implement it. I remember talking to someone and we talked about, hey, you get electric vehicles in your fleet. What's the biggest problem going to be? He's like, getting people to remember to charge a thing every night, coming up with charging protocols depending on where they are to make sure that these vehicles are always ready to go. Change is not always a great thing. It depends on how it's embraced. So the idea here is that, disruption can be a good thing unless it means time and money and effort out the door. The key takeaway here, and this one's probably the most important one, is that it's essential that you have a sense of business empathy. You really need to put yourself in the shoes of that owner to understand what is it that they're going through, what are they thinking about, like what are those considerations? Because as much as I believe I have the greatest products in sliced bread, it might never go out the door because that person, just as good as it is, they just don't want to be, upset the apple cart. So if we had to wrap this up, there's a bunch of pathways to success here. The first one is that we oftentimes hear people talking about, range is a great one. I need 300 or 400 miles because the vehicles I have right now get 300 or 400 miles per tank. Or I always need to make sure that that vehicle is full of charge because I don't want to run out. Well, that's great, but when you hop in your gas vehicle, is it always full of gas? Like, maybe not. The idea here, though, is that we keep running up against these old paradigms that people keep trying to shoehorn into the electric vehicle space, and they may not make sense. The whole thing here is about creating new paradigms, instilling new habits and new ways of thinking in users and prospective buyers. That's going to be probably one of the biggest keys to success here, is sort of changing the way that people think about what they do. It's the only way this is going to work, instead of trying to satisfy those old needs with a new product. The second point here is access to information isn't necessarily the key. So I talked about this a little bit. There's simply too much information out there for someone hard to know. So for a fleet owner or a manager or even a supplier, it's not about more information, it's about access to better information. And I would even go as far as to say it's about access to insights, really understanding how that information is applied in a pragmatic and tactical way that's going to make a business better, help you make better decisions. The next one, every business is unique. They're all like snowflakes. I mentioned that earlier. And it's sort of one of those things that we say in the industry, and it's true. Oftentimes we get requests on this end, can you aggregate the data? Can you aggregate the findings so that I can apply this universally, to the fleet space in a specific category? Well, the answer is probably no. No with an asterisk, like no, not without a whole lot of work. But more importantly, it's yes, we can, but you really need to understand the business objectives, from your side, and the business objectives from your clients or customers' side. You need to marry those two things together to be able to be effective at selling to this marketplace. Trying to sort of whitewash it or go in big time is probably not going to work. Our next pathway to success, consolidating your own knowledge and expertise, is essential. Absolutely, it's essential. There's so many different players when it comes to fleet that it sort of blows my mind. So it's not like passenger vehicle where you walk in, you buy a vehicle, you leave, and you're good. You have infrastructure people, you have upfitters, you have OEs, you have powertrain people, you have software people, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's not an easy role for a fleet manager to fill. And it's certainly not easy from a supplier perspective also. Let's not kid ourselves. Within large organizations trying to satisfy this market, the amount of integration that needs to happen internally is just as significant as outside. So are the powertrain people talking to the design people? Are they talking to the power people? All of those pieces have to come together inside too. So it's essential that there be sort of a common platform or communication inside your organization as well as out. And that consolidation is what's going to help you effectively sell to the guy who wants all the answers from as few places as possible. And then the last pathway to success is really around this idea of business empathy. So again, this is sort of, my role in our organization when it comes to fleet, and just in general, which is, do we really understand the motivations of someone who's getting into any product, into any vehicle? Do we understand how they're thinking? Do we understand what's important to them? And it goes beyond that, because it also includes, are there external influences that are making a difference? So just going back to that first example I gave you with the Tesla owner, that is an external influence. A Tesla passenger car is only remotely, related to a Class 8 tractor, and yet you have the person thinking about that because of what they've seen on the road. Or things like technology. We often hear, I want the technology inside the vehicle to be as good as my phone. And that's the measuring stick that they use when it comes to UX, UI, ergonomics, layout. All of those things come together to make a big difference. So it's really critical for us to understand what are the different factors that are influencing someone, how does that affect their thinking? And then subsequently, what's the decision that process that they use to satisfy those business needs? We have a new product coming. It's called Fleet Foresight, and it is essentially about that. So the idea here is it's very much about being on the ground, understanding what is it that people are really thinking and needing on a day-to-day basis. We've got a bunch of other products like our Fleet Advisory Hub, and we've a whole host of experts where we can get that bigger, higher level data and insights together with a product like Fleet Foresight. Now all of a sudden you get a more comprehensive view of what's going on in the marketplace. Now, a couple of things I want to mention. I've certainly raised a lot of questions and considerations. Hopefully, I've raised a lot of questions and considerations for you and make you think a little bit deeper or more progressively about what is it that this marketplace needs, or if you're in the marketplace, what is it that I need to help this business run more efficiently? We're going to go into a Q&A. So if you've got questions for me, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I want to tell you too, there's a panel that's happening tomorrow where we get some of the industry insiders together where we probe these topics even deeper. So on that note, I'll just sit back for a minute and let you sort of take this in and see if there's any questions or anything that I can answer for you. Oh, and I'm getting a note. This is cool because I get these notes as I'm talking. So apparently I can keep talking until there are questions. Well, let me leave this up here for one quick second. So one of the interesting things that we see, or that I see happening in fleet, is this duality that happens again for small. It's not even a duality because there's three components. So small, medium, and large fleets. There's certainly the way that they approach the market is significantly different. At the large end, the degree of sophistication that we see happening is pretty significant. We're talking about integration of high-level systems. So whether we're talking fleet management systems, monitoring systems, telematics, you name it, it's pretty high end. And this is in direct contrast to what we see happening, with the vast majority of fleets that are out there. A lot of times they're sort of winging it and they're spitballing. And that's a great thing, but certainly with the onset of EVs, we might see this market morph into something that forces them to be more sophisticated in the way that they run their businesses. So they're certainly going to need a helping hand in getting there. So beyond the equipment themselves, helping them manage the vehicles and the business themselves is going to be a significant opportunity for us in this space. Okay, so there's a question here. It says, what are the best online resources to conduct research on EVs, but even bigger picture, other alternatives as well? Great question. One of the things that when we talk to fleet owners, we hear them going to as far as resources is a lot of the industry associations. And normally I don't tout that as the place to go because it's not particularly cutting edge. But I will say, so this is from, it doesn't say who it's from, but whoever asked the question, I will say that a large number of fleet managers and operators rely on their industry associations to disseminate information to them. You need to be on that same page and gathering that same info to understand, again, sort of how they're thinking in the most pragmatic of ways. That I would say is a really good place to go. As far as other alternatives, so sort of bigger picture thinking, certainly keeping up to date on what's going on in the auto industry, because we're seeing again, the sort of influences that are happening in the sort of passenger car market floating out and being a adopted by or absorbed by the fleet market. That would be one thing. And then, sounds weird, but I would say really just keeping up with contemporary culture. So it's going to be a case of, keeping your eye out on latest technologies, social trends around how people are thinking about the future in green, and even things like how someone considers new products that are in the marketplace. So I'll give you an example for that one. With the onset of COVID and the onset of at-home deliveries, now all of a sudden people are thinking, why do I have to go and do things? Why can't I get things delivered to me? So the expectation is that, let's say on the vehicle market or on a vehicle scale, that I don't expect to have to go and manually do things anymore. I want smart systems like algorithms and AI to be predictive and tell me that I need to do something, or send me things that I need before I even need them. That's far removed from what we see happening now, or that any newsletter or information source can tell you. So just keeping an eye on those sorts of trends will really help you out in the long term. See if there's any more questions. Let's see, what would you recommend to the audience on how to stay with what is going on in this space? Well, I can tell you personally that one of the ways that I do it, or that we do it, are the shows. So coming across my desk and in my email on a daily basis, there are tons of people putting on online convention shows, summits, like this great one. That's a really great way. Show discretion and pick and choose the ones that really make the most sense to you. But I get things on everything from powertrain to materials to financing. That's a really great way to keep up with this stuff. You don't have to sit there all day long. Just pick, you always get an agenda or a syllabus of what's going down. Just pick and choose the lectures that really make sense to you or that stand out, and go and poke around and see what people are talking about. The great thing about this whole online environment that we're in is that we now get to see the world from 360-degree perspective. We just need to pick and choose the things that we need to watch. So you can really keep up to speed on what's going on in the marketplace just by attending these things, for an hour or a couple of hours per week. And that'll really help you.